My son signed me into Larkspur Manor on the coldest morning of February. And my eldest daughter held the door open like she was doing me a kindness. Corinne had already sold my sewing machines. Julien wouldn't look up from the elevator buttons. Marielle cried exactly the amount a stranger would find touching. By 4 o'clock the light was gone, and I was alone in a room that smelled of disinfectant and other people's grandmothers. They thought they had put me somewhere soft, somewhere quiet, somewhere I would finally stop asking about the trust, the missing statements, and the corporate cards they had been swiping, as though my whole life belonged to them. 9 days later, every one of those cards died at a hotel bar in front of 200 people. What none of them knew was that I carried my own suitcase into that building. Nobody made me. I chose that room. If this story reaches something in you, please like the video and subscribe. I'd like to know what you would have done sitting where I sat. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me what you're feeling, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. I was 36 the winter Emmett died. People say a person passes away like it's one moment, one clean edge. It isn't. Emmett was a millwright at a grain terminal, and he died on a Tuesday in a way I still can't say out loud without needing to sit down. The funeral was Saturday. The casseroles came. The cards came. The women from the parish said, "You're so strong, Rosalind," and I have thought about that word every year since. Strong is what people call you when they don't intend to carry anything. By April, the flowers were dead, and I was at the kitchen table on Ash Street with a shoebox of bills, 3 sleeping children, and a checking account with $211 in it. Julien was 8. Corinne was 6. Marielle was 1, still small enough to sleep with her cheek against my collarbone. Emmett had a small policy through the union. It buried him. That was all it did. I had my mother's Singer sewing machine in the back bedroom. That's not a metaphor. It was a black machine with gold lettering, heavier than Marielle, and it had made every curtain in that house. A neighbor's niece was getting married, and her dress didn't fit through the shoulders. She came to me because I was cheap and she was desperate. I took the seams apart and rebuilt them by hand, and I remember standing in my kitchen at 1 in the morning with the seam ripper in my teeth thinking, I can do this. This I can do. She paid me $40. I cried in the pantry so nobody would hear. Then her cousin came. Then a bride from Transcona, whose mother had died and had nobody to fix the hem. Then a woman who wanted her grandmother's dress from Poland taken in for a granddaughter who was 6 inches taller. I learned corsetry from a library book. I learned French seams from an old Ukrainian woman on Selkirk Avenue who charged me nothing and made me drink her tea. I took a bank loan I had no business taking and rented a narrow storefront on Corydon Avenue with a radiator that clanked like a man with a hammer, and I painted the name on the window myself with a brush that cost $2. Vashon Bridal House, Emmett's name, not mine, his. The office was my kitchen. The stockroom was the back bedroom. The delivery van was a rust-eaten Plymouth I plugged in every night from November to March because Winnipeg does not care how tired you are. I worked, that's the whole of it. I worked because Julian's hockey registration was due, and I had already asked for 1 extension. I worked because Corinne needed a coat that didn't come from the church basement bin, and she was old enough to know the difference. I worked because Marielle had a lisp, and speech therapy wasn't covered, and I couldn't stand the thought of one more thing being taken from that child. My children saw me tired. They never saw me quit. I made certain of that, and I have wondered lately whether that was a gift or a lie. Corinne grew up beautiful and orderly, and easily embarrassed. When she was in grade 11, she asked me not to come inside for her awards night, because I'd come straight from the shop, and I smelled of steam press and tailor's chalk. Said, "Of course, sweetheart," and laughed like it hadn't landed. Then I sat in the Plymouth in the parking lot with the heater running and cried for 20 minutes with my hands over my mouth. I never told her. I've been thinking about that too. Julien wasn't cruel. Julien was hungry. He watched the boys at school with their father's snowmobiles, and he decided very early that money was a kind of safety. And he was never wrong about that, only about the price. Marielle went soft instead of hard. She learned to leave the room when voices rose. She learned that if you never take a side, no one can accuse you of choosing the wrong one. I raised 3 children on wedding dresses and grief. By the time I was 60, Vacon Bridal House had 2 locations, 11 employees, and a name that meant something in this city. I had a house on Wellington Crescent that I bought myself, at 63, with money I earned with my own hands, and I stood in the empty front room the day I got the keys and said out loud, "Look at that, Emmett." I was 71 when my children decided I couldn't be trusted with any of it. It started the way these things start. It started with kindness. Corinne began driving out to the house on Sundays. She'd bring coffee and a bag of those almond croissants from the place on Academy, and she'd walk through the rooms while she talked, running her hand along the banister the way a realtor does. "This staircase, Mum. At your age, I'd been going up that staircase for 8 years. My knees knew every riser. Then it was the boiler. Then it was the driveway. Then it was, Mum, when did you last renew your driver's license? Then it was, Julien says he can just handle the bill payments. It's nothing, he's got the software." Julien had a cosmetic dentistry clinic in a glass building near the airport with his name in brushed steel on the wall. Corinne ran an events company and dressed like her own advertising. Marielle called herself a wellness practitioner, and she had 2 children and a husband who was always between things. I was proud of all 3. I want that on the record. I was so proud of them it made me stupid. The dinner was the second Sunday in September. I roasted a chicken. I made the biscuits Julien liked, from the recipe on the index card in Emmett's mother's writing. Because habit is stubborn, and my hands reach for the good plates even when my heart already knows. They came in one at a time. Corinne first, navy coat, leather portfolio under her arm, kissing my cheek and looking at my front hall, the way you look at a house that's about to be listed. Julien after, smelling expensive, carrying folders. Marielle last, with grocery store carnations, the orange sticker still on the cellophane. We ate. They asked about the weather. Somebody complimented the biscuits. Then Corinne set down her wine and said, "Mum, have you given any more thought to simplifying things?" "Simplifying what things?" "Responsibilities." I put down my fork. "You'll have to be specific." She smiled like I'd been difficult. "The house, the shop, the trust. It's a lot of moving parts, and if something happened, Julien and I would be scrambling. If something happened. If." Julien slid a folder across the table. "It's just a power of attorney for property, Mum. Standard. Everybody our age has their parents do this." "I'll read it," I said. Corinne's jaw did something. "Why does it feel like you don't trust us?" I have replayed that sentence 1,000 times. It's a beautiful piece of machinery. It puts the accusation in your mouth and makes you spit it out. "I trust you," I said. That was the last lie I told my children. They stayed for coffee. I went to the kitchen for the cream. Old houses carry sound. That house has an air return in the dining room baseboard that runs straight up the wall, and it's carried every argument, every lullaby, and every whispered thing since 1911. Julien said, "She's getting stubborn." Corinne said, "She's frightened." That's different. "Don't push, she'll dig in." Marielle said, from somewhere near the hallway, "Maybe we're moving too fast." And Corinne said, "We're not moving fast enough. If Mum signs the property one, the rest is paperwork." I stood in my own kitchen holding a small china jug of cream with both hands. "Not safer for Mum. Not easier for Mum. The rest is paperwork." I set the cream on the counter because my hands weren't steady, and I went into the powder room and shut the door and looked at the woman in the mirror, and she was still somebody's mother. But something had opened its eyes behind her face. I did not go back out and confront them. I want you to understand why. Because I know some of you are already angry with me. I was 71 years old. I had heard, through a baseboard, my children agree that I was an obstacle. If I had walked out of that powder room shouting, do you know what would have happened? Corinne would have said, "Mum, you're upset." Julien would have said, "Mum." Nobody said that. Marielle would have started to cry, and within a week there would have been a conversation about how Mum's been confused lately. She thought she heard something. They would not have had to lie about me. They only had to be patient. So I went back out and I served coffee and I asked Julien about his clinic. And when Corinne left, she said, "Think about the papers." And I said, "I will." And I meant something entirely different than she thought I did. Then I closed the door, and stood in the front hall of a house I had paid for with 40 years of my back, and I made 2 phone calls. Harriet Kowalchuk had done estates in this city for 35 years and had never once talked to me like I was fragile. Her office was above a pharmacy on Portage, and there was a photograph of her father's farm near Dauphin behind her desk. I told her everything, the Sundays, the folders, the baseboard. She let me finish. She didn't gasp. She didn't tell me they didn't mean it. Then she said, "Rosalind, when they come with the next document, do not sign it in your kitchen. Do not sign anything at a restaurant. Do not sign at their lawyer's. Tell them you'll sign at your own lawyer's office, because that's proper." And they'll agree, because greedy people love the appearance of proper. And then what? And then we talk about what the document says. I sat with that. Then Harriet asked me the question that decided the next 10 months of my life. She took off her glasses and she said, "How much are you willing to lose in order to be believed?" I didn't answer that day. I answered in November, because in October, Corinne booked the doctor's appointment. "Just a wellness check, Mum. Dr. Mystery's been asking to see you anyway." She hadn't. I called and confirmed. But I went, and I let all 3 of them come, because Harriet had told me one thing very clearly: let them build their record. We'll build ours underneath it. Dr. Farah Mystery has been my family doctor for 19 years. Her waiting room has a print of Lake of the Woods on the wall, and a receptionist named Bev, who knows what my grandchildren are studying. Dr. Mystery came out to the waiting room herself. "Rosalind, good to see you." Then her eyes went to my children. Corinne put out her hand. "Thank you so much for fitting us in. We've been concerned." Dr. Mystery shook it politely. Then she looked back at me and said, "How are you feeling?" I have loved that woman ever since. She took me in alone. She would not let them follow. She asked me the date, the year, the city, the Prime Minister, the Premier of Manitoba, the name of the street the clinic sits on. She had me draw a clock face showing 10 past 11. She had me count backwards from 100 by sevens. She had me explain what people mean when they say don't put the cart before the horse. She gave me 3 instructions in a row and watched me do all 3 in order. I answered everything. I did not answer well because I'm clever. I answered well because I have run a business with 11 employees for 4 decades, and my mind is the only tool I've ever fully owned. At the end, she sat back and said, "Rosalind, I'm going to write this up. Do you want a copy?" 2, I said. 1 sealed. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "All right," and she didn't ask a single question, and I have never been so grateful to be understood without explaining. In the hallway afterward, Corinne said, "So, everything fine?" "Everything fine," I said. And Julian said, "Well, these things move slowly," and I understood that he had already imagined a different result and had already made plans for it. They brought the documents on the 11th of November, Remembrance Day, which tells you something about their sense of occasion. I said what Harriet told me to say. "I'll sign at my lawyer's. It's proper." Corinne hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then she said, "Of course. That's smart. Greedy people love the appearance of proper." We met at Harriet's office 3 weeks later. Corinne wore navy. Julien brought his own lawyer, a young man with a very good haircut, who had never in his life read the middle of anything. Harriet had prepared the documents. The cover page said what their document said. Enduring power of attorney for property. Same title, same font. Harriet had matched it deliberately, and when I asked her whether that was allowed, she said, "They are free to read all 9 pages. I encourage it." They read the first page. Julian's lawyer flipped to the signature page and checked the initials boxes. Corinne said, "Mum, this is just a safety net." I said, "I know exactly what it is," and I signed. I want to be very honest with you, because I've heard people ask why a woman would sign anything after what she'd overheard. Here is the answer. The document I signed was an enduring power of attorney. Yes, springing, not immediate. It could not activate until I was declared incapable by an independent capacity assessment, in writing, from a physician of my choosing. They didn't read that. And on page 7, under a heading that looked like boilerplate, there was clause 11. If I were moved from my principal residence into any care facility, without that written assessment, 3 things happened automatically. Every credit facility attached to the alter ego trust, every corporate card, every line of credit, Every authorized user was suspended on the spot. A forensic accounting of the trust going back 7 years was triggered and could not be waived by anyone but me. And the trustee provisions reverted entirely to the settlor. The settlor was me. I built that trust when I turned 65, on the advice of an accountant who is now dead, and my children had spent 6 years enjoying its fruit without ever once asking who had planted it. They didn't read that either. Harriet gave them 9 pages. They read one. I have thought about that a great deal. My children did not fail to read the document because they were stupid. They failed because they could not conceive of a version of me who would use it. The rest was exactly as slow and reasonable as Corinne had promised. It was not one cruel act. That's what I need people to hear. It was 100 small, sensible requests. A key so contractors could get in. A signature because the utility wanted it. A temporary stay, just for the winter, just till the driveway's regraded. A safety concern. A daughter's tears. By January, Corinne had my house keys, Julian had my banking passwords, and Marielle had said nothing at all. In February, they told me about Larkspur Manor. It's not a nursing home, Mum. It's a personal care home. Private, beautiful. They've got a memory care wing. A what? It's just the safest floor, Corinne said. It's got the best staffing ratio. I said. You want to put me on the memory floor, Julian said. Mum, don't make it sound like that. Here is where I need you to understand the shape of the thing. They didn't need me confused. They needed me filed as confused. A secured floor, a locked wing, a note in a chart, because once that exists, everything after it is administration. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed and looked at Emmett's photograph on the nightstand. He's 29 in it, squinting, a cigarette. He never actually smoked, tucked behind his ear, because his friend thought it was funny. They're going to say I don't know my own mind, I told him. And I heard Harriet's question again. How much are you willing to lose in order to be believed? I called her at 9 at night. She picked up on the second ring. I said, Harriet, let them move me. She was quiet a long time. Then she said, Rosalind, I need you to understand that I cannot promise you'll be comfortable. I've been uncomfortable since 1989, I said. Set it up. The morning they took me, it was -34 with the wind. Corinne stood in my front hall on her phone. Julianne warmed up the car. Marielle sat on the stairs looking at her hands. Corinne said, Somebody grab Mum's case. And I said, I've got it. I carried my own suitcase down the front walk of my own house, past the Caraganas Emmett planted, past the spot where Julianne lost a tooth on the ice in 1986, and I put it in the trunk myself. Corinne was still on the phone. She never looked up. That is the part I remember most clearly. Not the intake forms, not the room, not the lemon smell. Just my breath in the cold air and my hand on the handle, and nobody watching. Room 214 at Larkspur Manor was clean and beige, and had a window that faced a courtyard with a bird feeder nobody filled. The door to the wing opened with a code. The code was printed on a laminated card at the nurse's station, which tells you what they really think about memory. The healthcare aide on my hall was a woman named Anita Sinclair, from Norway House, 42 years old, with a laugh that arrived before her opinions. On my second night, she found me sitting up at 11 with the lamp on and my journal in my lap. She said, You're not sleeping. I said, I'm working. She looked at the journal. She looked at me. She said, Okay, and she brought me a second pillow and a cup of tea, and she never once spoke to me the way people speak to a body in a bed. I wrote every day. Dates, times, who called, what was said. 9 days. Corinne texted twice. Settling in? And a photograph of my front hall with the rug rolled up. Julianne didn't text at all. Marielle sent a long message about how hard this was for everyone. And on the 9th night, at the Fort Garry Hotel, my daughter Corinne stood at the front of a ballroom in a champagne-colored dress and announced the relaunch of my company. She'd rebranded it. Maison Vachon. 200 people, a photographer, a woman from the paper. I know exactly what happened because Anita Sinclair's cousin was working the bar. Near the end of the evening, Corinne went to settle the tab. She did what she'd done for 6 years. She slid out the black corporate card on the trust account, without checking the amount, without wondering whether she had the right, and she handed it over like a woman conferring a favor. The bartender came back with that careful expression service people wear when they're about to embarrass someone powerful. I'm sorry, Miss Vachon. It's been declined. Corinne smiled because her first response to humiliation has always been disbelief. Run it again. He did. Declined. She gave him another card. Declined. A third. Declined. The women near her pretended not to notice, which of course means they noticed everything. Corinne laughed. The little laugh that's meant to make other people feel foolish for having eyes. There's a fraud hold. I've been dealing with the bank all week. Her hand shook when she reached for her personal visa. That one went through. Barely. By the time she got to her car, Julien had already called her twice. His clinic's operating account had frozen at 6:40 that evening, mid-payroll run. Marielle's automatic transfer had bounced, and out at Larkspur Manor, in room 214, my phone buzzed on the nightstand at 9:52 p.m. Harriet was sitting in the chair by the window with her coat still on, because I'd asked her to be there, and she'd driven through blowing snow to do it. The phone buzzed again, and again. Harriet said, "You don't have to answer." I watched the screen until it went dark. Then a message came. "Mum, what did you do? Not are you all right? Not we're sorry. Not can we come and see you? What did you do?" I sat there with my back against the pillows in a locked wing on the memory floor, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been loose for 40 years. All my life I had been afraid that if I ever said no, it would mean I hadn't loved them enough. That protecting myself would be the same as failing them. They had mistaken access for love, and I had mistaken sacrifice for proof. I picked up the phone. I typed 4 words. I read page 11. Harriet read it over my shoulder and made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Corinne wrote back within seconds. What is that supposed to mean? I looked at the screen for a long while. Then I whispered the answer, and I did not send it. It means you never did. The audit began on a Monday. Harriet came at 8 with 2 coffees, a legal pad, and the expression of a woman who has stopped protecting you from what's coming. 7 years, she said. That's what the clause says. I know what the clause says. I wrote it. I'm telling you what 7 years looks like. It looked like 11 bankers' boxes in a conference room off the Larkspur lobby that they let us use, because Anita Sinclair told the administrator I was a businesswoman conducting business, and said it in a tone that ended the conversation. 7 years of statements. 7 years of transfers and reimbursements and emergency requests and Mum, can you just cover this, and I'll get it back to you. 7 years of my motherhood printed out. Julien had taken $490,000 over 6 years and change. Some of it I had agreed to, out loud, in kitchens. Most of it I hadn't. His clinic had never made money. Not 1 quarter, not once. He had built a very expensive room to be admired in. And he had been paying for it with my thread and my needles and my 40 years of other women's daughters. Corinne hadn't taken cash. Corinne had taken life. Flights, a car lease, a wine account. $9,000 to a firm in Toronto for a rebrand of a company she did not own. A membership at a club I had never been invited to. Marielle had taken the least and the most often, and always in amounts small enough to be forgotten. Harriet slid a page across the table around 2 in the afternoon. It was an email from Corinne to a realtor named Doug Prokopchuk. 11 months old. Subject line: Wellington Crescent. Preliminary. Once my mother transitions out of the family home, what would you estimate we'd get without doing the kitchen? He'd replied with numbers. She'd replied with timelines. I put the page down, and I found I could not get enough air. Not because of the house. I want to be clear about that. Not because of the money. Because somewhere inside that email was the assumption that I had already become a problem to be scheduled. I remembered Corinne at 7, the winter after Emmett, sleeping in my bed for 4 months, because she was frightened that I would disappear too. I remembered her small hand checking for me in the dark. And she'd been getting valuations before I'd even left. Harriet passed me a tissue. I've seen worse. I laughed badly. Have you? Families? She said. It's always families. I thought that was the bottom. It wasn't. 2 days later, Harriet came in with a single sheet and she didn't sit down. Rosalind, I need you to read this sitting. It was a letter to Dr. Mystery. Handwritten. 2 pages. Dated 16 months before that Sunday dinner. 16 months before the folders. Before the baseboard. Before any of it. Dear Dr. Mystery, I'm writing about my mother. Some of us have noticed changes and we're worried about her judgment, particularly around money. I don't want to make trouble. I just want it on file. Signed, in the round, careful handwriting I taught her at the kitchen table on Ash Street. Marielle Vachon. My youngest. The one who cried. The one who never took a side. She had opened the file. 16 months early, before there was a single thing to open it about. I sat in a beige room in a locked wing, and I understood that avoidance is not innocence. That my daughter had not been cruel. She had been absent, and she had signed her name to the door they all later walked through. And she had told herself it was concern. Control wrapped as care. My mother had a phrase for it in Ukrainian, and I never understood it until I was 71. Harriet said, quietly, "There's enough here for civil recovery, financial abuse, possibly more." I said, "I'd want to send my children to court." "You may not have to. What if they apologize?" She thought about it a long time. Then she said, "An apology and an accounting are not the same thing." They came back with pastries. That's what undid me, oddly. Not the anger I'd braced for. They arrived at Larkspur on a Thursday morning, with a box from the place on Academy, and their faces arranged into brightness, like people trying to fix a broken window by hanging a curtain over it. Anita knocked. "Mrs. Vachon, your family's downstairs." "All three?" "All three." I looked at Emmett's photograph, which I had brought, and sat on the windowsill. "Tell them I'll see them in the conference room." Anita's eyebrows went up. "Not up here?" "No. That room was the only private thing I had left in the building. My children had already walked into my house, my accounts, my mind and my dignity as though the doors were open. They were not walking into this." I went down in my own good coat. Harriet was already seated with a folder she did not open. Corinne set white roses on the table, the kind people send to hospitals, funerals, and women they've hurt but haven't apologized to. "Mum," she said, "this has all gotten completely out of hand, has it?" "Yes. The bank has made some absurd error. Cards frozen, accounts restricted, everything routed through legal. It's humiliating. Humiliating. Not frightening. Not heartbreaking. Not, Mum, are you okay in here?" Humiliating. Julien leaned in. "Mum, nobody abandoned you." I hadn't used the word. He had. Marielle started to cry. And I sat there with my hands folded and I let them talk. And Harriet let them talk. And after 11 minutes Corinne said the thing she had come to say. "We just need you to sign the release so the accounts reopen." "No," I said. The silence in that room had a temperature. "Mum." "No." I put both hands flat on the table. "You will each receive the full accounting. Every line, every date. You'll read it, all of it, not just the first page, and then we'll speak." Corinne's voice went very flat. "You've been in here 9 days. Are you sure you're thinking clearly?" And there it was. Right there in the open at last. Harriet reached into her folder and slid across a sealed envelope. Dr. Farah Mystery's capacity assessment, dated the previous October, signed, unopened, witnessed. "Your mother," Harriet said pleasantly, "has been thinking more clearly than anyone in this building." Julian came back alone on the Saturday. He sat down and looked at his hands for a while, and then he said, "The clinics never worked, Mum." "I know. I've seen the numbers. I kept thinking one more year." He laughed and it came apart. "Every year I thought one more." I asked him the only question I had. "When you were taking it, did you tell yourself it was borrowing?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "No. I told myself it would be mine, anyway." That is the most honest sentence my son has ever said to me. I have decided to be grateful for it. I said, "An inheritance is a gift, Julien. It has never once been a right." He put his head in his hands, and my whole body wanted to go around the table to him, and I stayed exactly where I was, and that was the hardest thing I have ever done as a mother. Marielle came on the Sunday. She cried before she sat down. "I didn't know," she said. "Which part? The house, the petition, any of it?" "Marielle." I set the letter on the table between us. 2 pages, her handwriting. She looked at it for a long time and then she stopped crying, which frightened me more than the crying had. I thought, if I didn't ask questions, she said, nobody would ever make me pick a side. You picked one. You just did it early and quietly, and then you spent 16 months pretending you hadn't. She said, "Do you hate me?" They all asked me that, all 3 of them, and not one of them asked, "What did we do to you?" Only whether they were still lovable. "I hate what happened," I said. She nodded. She stood up. She left. Corinne was last. And Corinne did not come to Larkspur at all. Corinne came to Wellington Crescent in April, after I'd gone home, and stood in my front hall in her navy coat, and did not sit down. "You humiliated me," she said. Yes, she hadn't expected that. In front of everyone I know. "Corinne," I said, "you were standing in a ballroom announcing the relaunch of a company you had never once worked a single day as inside, while your mother sat behind a coded door on a memory ward." I set down my tea. "I did not humiliate you. I stopped subsidizing you. You've simply never been able to tell those two things apart." She stared at me, and for 1 second, I saw the little girl who checked for me in the dark. Then she said, "I want to know what you're going to do with the company." And the second was gone. Here's what I did. Vashon Bridal House does not belong to my children. It doesn't belong to me anymore either. I transferred it, in full, to a foundation. The proceeds fund the Emmett Vashon Trades Bursary at Red River College Polytechnic. Millwrights, welders, machinists, apprentices whose fathers died on Tuesdays. It is not a large bursary. It will outlive all of us. The house on Wellington Crescent stays in my name until I die, and then it's sold. And that money goes to the same place. My children each received the full 7-year accounting, bound 406 pages. Harriet insisted on the binding. She said, "Let them feel the weight of it." And I made one offer, once. Anyone who wanted a relationship with me was welcome to it, not a dollar attached. But if they wanted to be part of what I built, the shop, the name, the thread, they could work a year in it, not manage. Work, steam, pin, hem. Stand on the floor with brides who are frightened and broke and beautiful, and learn what it costs to make a person feel worthy of being seen. Julien said yes. He sold the clinic at a loss, and he is, at this moment, 49 years old, on his knees on a hardwood floor, with a mouthful of pins, terrible at it, and he has not missed a Tuesday in 14 months. We don't talk much. He brings me coffee. It's enough. Some mornings I look at the back of his head, bent over a hem, and I see Emmett so clearly I have to go into the stockroom. Corinne said no. Corinne said several other things, and then she left, and for 4 months I did not hear from her. In September, she rang the doorbell on a Sunday afternoon, with no croissants and no portfolio, and she said, "I don't know how to be around you if you're not giving me something." I said, "Come in, and we'll find out." She's been coming most Sundays since. It is not easy. She still catalogues my rooms with her eyes. But last month, she brought her own coffee, and she washed the cups. Marielle has not come back. I want to be truthful with you, because I think a story that ties every knot is a story that's lying to you. Marielle sends a card at Christmas. She signs it love. Her children come in the summer, and I bake with them, and they are the best hours of my year, and their mother waits in the car. I have written her 4 letters. I have sent 2. Some children come home, and some children don't, and a mother does not get to choose which. And every night I set the table for whoever might. Last Thursday, I climbed my staircase at 10:30. My knees still complain. The arthritis in my hands has taken the fine stitching from me, and I've made my peace with that, mostly, in the afternoons. Healing doesn't erase anything. It just teaches you a different way to carry it. Emmett's photograph is on the nightstand where it's always been. 29 years old. Cigarette behind his ear. I sat down on the edge of the bed and I said, "One of them came home." Maybe he already knew. Emmett understood something I took 72 years to learn. That families are not held together by money, and not by sacrifice, and certainly not by fear. They survive only when the truth is allowed into the room, and somebody is brave enough to keep it there. My children put me on a locked floor. Their cards stopped working. Their lives came apart, and for a while so did mine. But losing everything false is sometimes the only way to find out what was ever true. The house remained. My name on the window remained. My mind, which they tried to file away, remained. And I remained. I turned out the lamp and I lay down in my own bed in my own house, and I found that I was grateful. Not for the betrayal, not for the beige room or the bird feeder nobody filled. Grateful that, at 72, I finally learned that being loved and being useful are not the same thing. And that once a woman knows the difference, nobody can take her life from her again. There comes a point in most lives when we discover that love and sacrifice were never synonyms. I believed for 40 years that a good mother gives more, fixes more, forgives faster, and asks for less. I believed my worth was the sum of what I could provide. I assumed my children would feel the cost of everything I handed them. But love without a single boundary teaches people to stop seeing the person doing the loving. Getting older does not make you worth less. Needing help does not take your dignity. And protecting yourself is not a smaller kind of love. Sometimes it is the only honest kind left. Sometimes the bravest thing a parent can say is no. Sometimes the kindest thing you can hand a grown child is an accounting. Forgiveness matters, but forgiveness without change is just the same wound on a longer schedule. Real healing starts the day someone finally tells the truth out loud and refuses to take it back. If you're a parent watching this, your life still belongs to you. Your home, your choices, your peace, your name on the window, all of it, still yours. And if you're somebody's grown child watching this at 1 a.m, your mother did not become less of a person when she got older. She's still frightened sometimes. She still needs to be respected. She still deserves to be seen while she's here to see it. The largest thing parents leave behind was never in the will. So before you go, I'd truly like to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a line with someone you loved? What would you have done if you'd been standing in that kitchen holding the cream? Tell me your story. Tell me how you'd have handled Corinne, and whether you'd have forgiven Julian, and whether you'd still be writing letters to Marielle. Tell me which of my children you would never forgive, and tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is in your city right now. If this found you tonight, please like the video, subscribe, and come back for more stories about family, betrayal, forgiveness, and the strength that arrives late and stays. It is never too late to take your own name back.